Welcome to this revision blast for AQA GCSE Geography. Today we are focusing on cold environments, which is part of the Living World unit on paper 1. Remember, this is an optional topic, so if it doesn't seem familiar to you, it's probably because you've studied hot deserts instead, so please watch the revision blast for that unit instead. Right, let's crack on. We're going to start off with some altered vowels. These look a little bit like anagrams, but they are not. Each of the key terms shown have had the vowels changed to an alternative. You just need to work out what the key term or the key phrase is, and they are all linked to cold environments. So our first one is on the screen. Ready? I think it's quite a tricky one actually. Let's see if you have worked it out. It is the Arctic Ocean. Okay, well done if you spotted that. Number 2, one which is a little bit easier, I think. Let's have a look at the answer. It is geothermal energy, and the reason geothermal energy is here is because in a couple of the case studies that you may have looking at cold environments, geothermal energy is a possibility for these regions because they are located along plate boundaries where there is some tectonic activity. Okay, this one is quite an easy one, hopefully. It's a really important key term for cold environments. Let's see if you have worked it out. It is permafrost, the idea that the ground is permanently frozen, and is a real problem for these cold environment regions. Number 4, so this time we're looking at 2 different types of cold environment, one more extreme than the other. So hopefully we have spotted that they are tundra and polar, and I'm not going to go into any more detail at the moment because we've got some activities that will in a moment. And one of our biggest challenges in cold environments is this. Just give you a moment to try and work out what it is. Hopefully you have spotted that it is extreme temperature. So we are looking at the extreme cold here. So we mentioned a polar or tundra a moment ago. So some of you will have studied tundra regions for your cold environment case study. Some of you will have studied polar regions. So what is the difference between the two? Well, the polar regions are much, much more extreme. Okay, so when we're talking about the polar regions, we are talking about the very, very far north and south of the globe. These are the coldest environments, and they are very dry as well. Okay, so there is not a huge amounts of biodiversity. It's very difficult to live there. Whereas the tundra regions, again, life is challenging, but it is less extreme. So there are people living there. There is a high level of biodiversity. So I'm going to give you a minute to sort these 8 things into either polar or tundra. Good luck. Let's see how you got on, whether you were able to pop them in the correct categories. So in our polar category, we've got the winter temperatures often falling below -50. We've got very low precipitation totals. So polar regions are actually classified as deserts. They're just cold deserts. They have around about the same precipitation as our hot desert. There are a few animals, so you've got polar bears in the North Pole, and we've got penguins down in the south. There are a few others, but not many species can adapt. And the soil is covered in ice, so it is permanently frozen. Now, if we move across the tundra, we've got far more animals. So, for example, we've got Arctic foxes and Arctic hares. There is permafrost, but it does melt in the summer close to the surface. The winter temperatures drop down to about -20, so still fairly cold. And we have low-growing flowering plants there, quite in abundance, but they're low-growing, and they're low-growing to protect them from the harsh winds and the sort of cold temperatures. So we're going to have a look at this connection spinner activity, and we're going to have a look at plant adaptations in particular. So what we've got on the screen are a number of different plant adaptations that that feature in tundra environments in particular. What we want to do is going to send off the spinner. Where it stops, you're going to need to think about how that feature helps the plant adapt to the conditions in the tundra environment. So you might want to pause once it has landed on the right thing to have a think about it. You might want to have a pen and paper with you to make a few notes. Let's have a go. Okay, so we have got low growing. So plants tend to be low growing. Why does this help them adapt to those cold environments? So it's going to give you a few moments and then we will reveal the answer. Let's have a look. So it enables them to survive those strong winds. They're generally between 5 and 15 centimetres off the ground. And that means that when it is really windy, which it quite often is in these regions, that the plants are not breaking due to those high winds. We're going to send the spinner around once more. So it's landed on brightly coloured berries. So again, have a few moments to think about why these might help a plants adapt to these cold, harsh conditions. So if you need a little bit more time, then just pause the video. We're just about to reveal the answer. Let's have a look. Berries are eaten by birds, and this helps with seed dispersal, so it helps with those life cycles. Let's have a think about some of the others. So we've got plants that have seeds that scatter in the wind. That's quite an important thing. We've got leaves that are thin and waxy that help reduce transpiration, and they're darker to absorb energy from the sun. And plants have that short growing season and life cycle, which is really important because it means that they can sort of, as soon as conditions are right, they can spring into life. The stems have got a thick bark, which means they can, it protects them from the cold. The hairy stem also protects them from the cold as well. So that klaxon has alerted you to the fact that it is case study time. For this unit, you will have had to study a named example of a cold environment. Now, some of you will have studied Alaska, some of you will have studied perhaps Svalbard, some of you will have maybe looked at Antarctica instead. We're going to focus on Alaska for the next couple of activities. However, the things that we're talking about here are relevant to all of your case studies, so don't worry if this is not your named example. So let's just remind ourselves about Alaska. It is an enormous state. It's part of the USA, despite not being attached to it. Instead, it borders Canada and the Arctic Ocean. It's nearly 2 million square kilometres in size, but it is one of the most sparsely populated places on Earth because it's so cold and it is so remote. It's got around 750,000 residents, made up mainly of indigenous populations, but also permanent settlers, often from Europe. However, there are also lots of economic migrants who travel to Alaska temporarily in search of work, with many oil and mining companies that are set up there. Around half of the population of Alaska live in the state capital of Anchorage. We're going to start off by looking at a random countdown. So the letters of each economic activity that take place in Alaska have been rearranged. Although we're focusing on Alaska, these economic activities are also relevant if you have done the Svalbard in Norway case study as well. So you will have 30 seconds each time to try and work out what the activity is. Let's go with our first one. Okay, have we worked this one out? It is fishing. So Alaska itself has over 3,000 rivers, 3 million lakes, and it's got nearly 11,000 kilometres of coastline. So there are loads and loads of economic opportunities linked to fishing. Two types of fishing take place in Alaska. You've got commercial fishing, which is mainly salmon, crab and whitefish. It's a huge sector and actually provides around 10% of all jobs in Alaska. It employs 78,000 people, generates over $6 billion every year. The other type of fishing is subsistence and is usually done by the Native American communities, and they're dependent on fish for lots of things, including food, oil, and the bones which they often use to make clothing and tools. So Alaska's fisheries are actually seen as quite a good example of sustainable management. Okay, let's do the next one. So have we worked this one out? It is tourism, and this attracts between 1 and 2 million visitors every year in the summer, and again is one of Alaska's biggest employers. But much of the work obviously is seasonal, and it does tend to be quite poorly paid. So within Alaska, there are numerous national parks, preserved villages, refuges and monuments, and all sorts of things as historical sites for those interested in Native American culture. It does offer other attractions as well, so fishing, seeing wildlife, whale watching and kayaking in particular. There's also hiking, there's skiing, you've got rock climbing, there's sightseeing by helicopter, and there's really popular off-roading as well. But the off-roading itself leads to all sorts of problems with leaving deep tyre tracks through the waterlogged ground after the permafrost has melted. But because it's so cold, it takes the land many, many years to recover from that. It also attracts lots of cruise ship passengers. So about 60% of all visitors coming in actually come in on cruise ships. Okay, let's move on to our next one. So this one is quite tricky. I'm not sure how many of you will have got this one. It is mineral extraction. I could have put mining on, but I thought that made it far too easy. So if you got mineral extraction, then well done. So Alaska itself has got huge amounts of minerals. 150 years ago, it was known as a gold rush state, and gold still accounts for around about 20% of the state's mining wealth, although silver, zinc and lead mining are also really important. But this is a bit of an issue for Alaska because these gold mines must be managed really carefully to minimise the environmental impacts, because lots of toxic chemicals are used to process gold, such as mercury, cyanide and nitric acid. As a result, mining development sometimes has been halted due to environmental campaigns. So a great example of this is in 2013, the Pebble Mine Gold project was closed down, which would have been North America's largest open pit operation. and it was closed down because Native American communities ran a really effective No Dirty Gold campaign, which was supported by over 50 businesses, and that actually made the mining giant Anglo American walk away from a $500 million investment due to the scale of opposition. They just decided to cut their money and run. Right, here's our next one. Let's have a look. It is energy development. So energy production is another big employer in Alaska, particularly the oil industry, which we'll talk about in a minute. There are also more than 50 hydroelectric power plants supplying Alaskan communities with 1/5 of their electricity. And that's because these previously glaciated U-shaped valleys that run across Alaska are perfect for HEP generation, with these great big rivers running through wide valleys. Geothermal energy is also harnessed in these tectonically active parts of the state, particularly along the coastline, which is part of the Pacific Ring of Fire. So we've left you with a really tricky one here. Did anybody spot this one? So it's another economic activity. It's really important. It is oil and gas drilling. If you got that, well done, because that was super tricky. Alaska has vast reserves of oil and gas, both on land and also offshore in the Beaufort Sea and the Arctic Ocean. And the industry provides around 100,000 jobs. So in other words, it employs around 1 in 7 Alaskans, and it contributes around 1/3 of the state's annual earnings of around $40 billion. In the 1970s, the 800-kilometre trans-Alaskan oil pipe was built to transport oil to the southern port of Valdez, as the ice in the northern seas meant that oil tankers couldn't be used. The pipeline took 5 years to build. It cost around $8 billion, and it was really complicated for many reasons. So it had to be raised to stop it having contact with the frozen ground. It is really thickly insulated to protect it from freezing, but also to stop the permafrost above it melting. And pipeline suspension bridges were used to cross the state's major rivers, and the pipeline also zigzags in some areas, so it's flexible and it can adjust to any ground movements from earthquakes. Now, there are loads of benefits to oil and gas production in Alaska. It provides huge amounts of jobs. It accounts for about 90% of all taxes raised in the state, and it funds things like education, healthcare, policing, and other important community services. It also does go underground at some places along the route, so it doesn't disturb migration routes of animals such as the tundra caribou. However, there are lots of issues as well. Migrant workers take the majority of jobs created by the oil industry. They don't tend to spend much locally, and they often only have short-term contracts, so multiplier effect is less effective here. And in 1989, an oil tanker called Exxon Valdez ran aground in along the southern Alaskan coast, and as a result, it spilled huge amounts of oil, and only 15% of the 1.2 million spilled barrels were ever recovered. And it was an environmental catastrophe. So around about 5,000 sea otters were killed, many seals, lots of eagles, all sorts of things there. So it does show that although it is very economically beneficial, there are some huge environmental costs to take into account. Right, let's see how well you have been listening with our true or false activities. So number 1, there are 3,000 rivers and 3 million lakes in Alaska. It sounds impossible, but is it true or false? It is true. Number 2, In Alaska, it is illegal to hunt and kill whales and polar bears. Is this true or false? It's actually false. Some of us might be quite horrified by that. Number 3. The Trans-Alaskan oil pipeline is buried underground in places so it does not disturb the caribou migration. Is this true or false? Let's have a look. It is true. Oil and gas accounts for more than 90% of the taxes raised in Alaska. Is this true or false? It is true. And the Alaskan oil industry provides 2,000 jobs and mainly employs local people. Let's have a look. It is false. Okay, so we have our second case study alert. This time we're looking at Svalbard. So some of you will have studied Svalbard if you did not do Alaska. So Svalbard is in Norway. It is the most northerly permanently inhabited island group. It is incredibly remote. You can see a map of it on the screen here. Looking at the Svalbard case study, we're going to do a connection wall, which contains 16 key phrases about economic activities in Svalbard. They can be grouped into 4 groups of 4. And again, if you haven't done this case study, these are probably going to be fairly relevant to this case that you've done, although obviously with slightly different specific details. On the screen, we have got 16 things that are to do with Svalbard. They can be popped into 4 different economic activities. The first one that I would like you to look for are phrases that are to do with mineral. So I'm going to give you a few moments, but you probably need to pause the video here to take some of these in. So if you haven't paused the video, please do. We are going to reveal in a moment the 4 statements or phrases that are to do with mineral extraction. Right, let's have a look. So it is the main economic activity in Svalbard. 300 people in the area are employed in mines. An access road to the mines has been built over a glacier and obviously very controversial at the time. And there are rich reserves of coal. So if you got those correct, well done. The next one that we are looking for are statements to do with energy production. Again, you might want to pause the video to give yourself a little bit more time. So we're looking at 4 statements that are all linked to energy production in Svalbard. Let's reveal. So we have got carbon capture and storage, which is being trialled in Svalbard. It does have Norway's only coal-fired power station, so quite controversially, they are still using coal to generate electricity, but the plans are to use geothermal in the future, and the reason they're able to do that is because they're really close to the mid-Atlantic ridge. There's hot rocks next to the surface which they can harness for geothermal energy. Right, our next one, we're looking for the 4 statements that are all linked to fishing. Hopefully it's getting quite a bit easier now, but again, if you need to pause, please do. So let's reveal the answers. We've got the cold water of the Barents Sea. This is supposed to be one of the largest breeding grounds in the world, making it a really important breeding ground, and as a result it has one of the largest stock of cod in the world, which is obviously a really important fish commercially, and it does have 150 different species of fish. Now we are left over with 4 boxes. We've got the Northern Lights, we've got glaciers and fjords, we've got 70,000 visitors annually, and adventure trips, e.g. snowmobile safaris. What is the link? What is the one thing that is linking these 4 remaining boxes together? Just going to give you a moment. Right, let's reveal. It is tourism, okay? Tourism really, really important to these remote regions. Again, lots of this tourism here is cruise ship tourism. Let's move on to a Mend the Gap activity. Now we're going to have a piece of text which has some missing words or missing phrases. You need to try and work out what they are, and the text that you will see in a moment answers the question, how are cold environments at risk from human activity? Human activity on a global scale is creating risks for cold environments because our use of fossil fuels and increased production of something gases is enhancing the greenhouse effect and causing something warming, which causes cold environment climates to change and affects something levels and saltwater content. On a local scale, extracting something means that land is developed with transport networks and buildings constructed, which can cause the something to melt and damage its habitats. At this point, you can pause the video and try and work out what these five missing words are. Give you a clue here, the number of dashes is going to be equal to the length of the word that is missing. And the one after affects is a 3-letter word, just the formatting has meant that it's gone on across 2 lines. So pause the video now, because we are about to reveal the answers. Let's see if you have got these correct. We have got greenhouse gases, we've got causing global warming, it affects sea levels, on a local scale extracting minerals means that the land is developed, and then at the bottom we have got it can cause the permafrost to melt and damage its habitat. So well done if you got those correct. Okay, we're going to do an on-balance activity. We're thinking about the idea here of giving cold environments special wilderness area protected status. One of the questions that could come up either as a 6 or a 9 marker is the idea here about economic gain over environmental protection. And obviously one of the ways that we can protect these environments is by giving them special wilderness area protected status, meaning that very little economic activity can take place at all. So what would be some of the benefits of that? Again, you might want to pause the video here to enable you time to write down a couple of benefits. So 2 advantages of giving cold environments special wilderness protected status. Let's have a look at some of these advantages. So rare plants and animals will be protected. That's obviously really important. And we've mentioned earlier that cold environments are fragile and they're easily damaged by economic activity. Because they're so cold, it takes land much longer to recover from any damage. So we're now looking at 2 disadvantages of giving cold environments special wilderness area protected status. Again, if you need to pause the video, please do. Note down a couple of things. So why might people argue that they don't want this wilderness protected status? Let's have a look at some suggestions. So we've got the cold environments are rich in resources, particularly oil and fish, and some of these areas are really remote. So actually there's not a huge amount of other economic activities available to them. If they're not able to exploit the resources, that's going to have a real economic impact. It also over the years there's been a vast improvement in technology, which means that cold environments can be exploited with much less impact. So we are able to use these areas without causing as much damage as perhaps we would have done in the future. Right, we're going to move on to a 60-second challenge here. Our first question is, how do animals adapt to the tundra biome? Let's have a look at some answers. So the tundra is much less extreme. You're going to find more animal species here. So you might have animals such as the Arctic fox and the snowshoe hare, and they have white fur, meaning they're camouflaged against the white snow, which is really good for being a predator, and it keeps them out of sight if they're being hunted. We've got caribou and musk ox, which are able to keep warm when it's freezing because they've got 2 layers of thick fur, and that fur keeps them warm anyway, but they're also able to trap air between the different layers, which gives them better insulation from the bitter temperatures. Caribou and musk ox also have really large hooves, which enables them to travel over waterlogged land, and it protects their feet from rotting, and it also means they can use them to break through thick ice in order to find drinking water. And finally, many species in the tundra also hibernate during the winter, whereas others migrate to warmer regions such as birds flying south. Let's do another 30-second challenge. So this time we asked you how animals adapt to the polar biome. Let's have a look at some suggested answers. So we'll start off with polar bears in the Arctic. They're probably the most well-known there. They retain heat with their thick fur, and they have an insulating layer of fat, as well as having a black nose and black foot pads to absorb heat from the sun. They spend most of their time hunting seals in the northern part of the Arctic Ocean, and when seals are scarce, they roam inland into the tundra, and they often end up in towns where they can cause problems. Polar bears hibernate during winter as it's so cold and there is little food available, and they use that thick layer of fat they've built up at other times over the year to keep them well insulated. Now we move south, we'll go to Antarctica and we'll think about penguins. These have got a variety of adaptations to help them survive. They've got thicker plumage than any other bird, with 2 layers of feathers, along with stiff feathers on the outside and the softer ones inside. Again, the double layer, like the caribou and the musk ox, traps body heat and provides really good insulation. The feathers are also water resistant, which keeps them warm even when they're swimming in the freezing Antarctic Ocean, and they're buoyant so they can float whenever they need. Penguins have streamlined bodies, which helps them reduce the drag when swimming, which means that they can move quickly through the water and it conserves their energy. They also have tiny flippers and web feet, which helps them to propel underwater, and that means that they can get food really quickly and avoid predators. In addition, they've got thick layers of blubber to help them keep warm, and it provides them with energy when food is scarce. And finally, they huddle in large groups to keep warm. The penguins are really organised here, and they rotate round from the edge to the centre to ensure that everyone stays warm and is able to rest for a bit. Right, let's do another 30-second challenge. So this time, what are some possible impacts of economic development in the tundra environment? Let's have a look at what you could have written. So we've got the transport of oil can lead to spillage either from oil tanker incidents or damaged overground pipelines. We've got roads created to service construction sites can become waterlogged and very muddy because the permafrost is impermeable and meltwater doesn't drain away. And we've got tourists wandering away from paths can cause damage to vegetation, and they might leave rubbish behind, causing harm to animals. Right, we've got one more 30-second challenge, and it's actually our final activity of the revision blasts. So off we go. How does international cooperation reduce the risk to cold environments? Right, let's see what you could have put for this one. So you've got the fact that the Barents Sea is divided between Norwegian and Russian territorial waters. Its cold waters provide some of the richest fishing grounds in the world, but they're also important as breeding and nursery grounds for fish species. So to ensure it's not overfished, it's jointly controlled and monitored by Norway and Russia, and they cooperate to protect this natural resource. It's really important. Right, well done for getting to the end. We've obviously covered a variety of tasks here and looked at lots of content from this unit. Hopefully it will enable you to go into paper 1 feeling much more confident. And remember, we have got other revision blasts for all the units across both papers. All of paper 1 are currently in place. If the paper 2 ones are not there at the moment, they will be in the next week or so. And finally, good luck.